Well, hi, I'm Brian. I serve, my full-time gig is being the pastor of St. Mark's Lutheran in Conshohocken, where I've been the last 8 years or so. But for the last couple of years, I've been serving with this ragtag team of holy innovators that we lovingly call the Vitality Team. So some of them are with us today. Some of them are not because they work full-time jobs, but are also part of the team. So we give thanks for those who are joining us here today. And I'll introduce them. So we have Kayla Sadawi, who is a Reverend Seminarian, soon to be approved and awaiting ordination. So Kayla is with us.
Yay!
We have the pastor Sandra Brown, who is serving the Synod in an interim capacity right now at Good Shepherd. Is it right? Yeah, Good Shepherd. In Southampton, but she has all the institutional knowledge, so brings a wealth of resources to our team. So welcome. Tom Salber is on and is part of our team, although I don't see his video. So he might be also at work and listening along, and so is Dwight Mason. Pastor Dwight Mason might be at work and listening along as well. So hopefully as we get into the meat of this, we will hear from some of them as well as we talk about some of the things that the Vitality team has been doing. So I want to thank you all for coming today with such an ambiguous topic with a word like vitality. What does that mean? And as we get into this, what I'd like to do is kind of continue to work at our language around vitality and kind of getting in a definition, give you some history of where that kind of has come from in the last couple of years. And then also give you some examples of the work that we've been doing the last couple of years across our synod. So, yeah, I'm kind of seeing a mix of both pastors and probably some congregational leaders. So that's exciting to see. And I will try and be as clear in my language, but I use a lot of anachronisms in this work, and so if there are things that I say that don't sound like you know what I'm talking about, please go ahead and use the Zoom features to go ahead and raise your hand.
Go away. He said you already bought it.
And go ahead and use your raise your hand function, and I will try and be attentive to looking at that. But I'm also going to use a PowerPoint, and so I will try and make everyone as big as I can on the screens that I have. So sound good? All right. And away we go. So give me just a second to move everybody around here. Let's move you guys over here. Everybody really big. There we go. There you are. All right. So vitality. Oh, see now, Bob, this is not, come on, click through. There we go. So this is also part of a presentation that I did back at the last time we had an in-person Synod Assembly all the way back in 2019, which seems so far away and yet not so far away. But that was the last time that we presented really synodically anything on congregational vitality. And so some of these slides are from that to kind of refresh and bring back that language, but also to kind of talk about some of the initiatives that we've been doing. It's no shock to many of us in ministry right now that the landscape of doing ministry over the last 50 years has dramatically shifted. And so the reality of our people, the reality of the context for which we're doing ministry has fundamentally shifted. Some of the language around this shifting landscape that's been used by not only the military circles to describe the changing complexity of the battlefield these days, but also was picked up by Harvard Business School, is a term that's called VUCA. And those initials stand for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, to describe the landscape for doing ministry that we're in right now. And when I said this in 2019, I did not want to be a prophet of demise, but who knew that we were getting ready to go into this pandemic that would fundamentally alter many things in our life. And so I think if we had any doubt that we were living in volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous times, we now have greater clarity around that. At the same time, over the last 5 years, our national church, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, has been conducting a discernment process called Future Directions, where they spent some time imagining the church that we were becoming. And so one of the things that they came out with this is a shared vision and a shared purpose. So the shared purpose of being together in Jesus Christ, we are freed by grace to live faithfully and witness boldly and serve joyfully. And then the vision for our denomination, a world experiencing the difference God's grace and the love in Christ makes for all people and creation. So we were working on ways that we could tell the story of the church that we were becoming in the 21st century. And one of those things that came out of that was, one is an emphasis on leadership development, and the other is an emphasis on congregational vitality. And so they took inspiration from Matthew 5, "You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hid. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it under the bushel basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven." As the ELCA looks ahead to the future, we aspire to have congregations whose faith shines in their relationship with God, each other, and their community. Vital congregations experience heightened worship, prayer, study of scripture, and the sharing of testimony as they discern the presence and will of God in their midst. So if I had to have a definition of congregational vitality, it would be these three things. They are life-changing relationships with God, each other, and the world. And so the process of congregational vitality is really about relationship building. And how do we help congregations focus on letting their light shine in the midst of those relationships and in their wider communities? So to combat kind of the VUCA-ness of our world, congregational vitality tries to counteract that volatility with clarity of vision, with an uncertainty, with an understanding of faith. In complexity, clarity. In ambiguity, agility. And so that's my VUCA counterpoint of how the process of vitality kind of helps us. And these are all principles that are built on adaptive leadership too, that we might be able to see ways for us to make sense out of what we're experiencing. So at the heart of vitality is these three key relationships: helping congregations strengthen their relationship with God, nurture relationships among themselves, and have a strong presence in the community. Vital communities exhibit vital signs. And much like when you go to the doctor and they check your heart rate, blood pressure, oxygen saturation, respiration, and temperature, they are indicators of health. They're not diagnosis. They're definitely not indicators of terminal illness, but they are useful in coming up with a diagnosis. And so we say that these vital signs or these markers of vitality are present in some degree, hopefully, in a lot of congregations. And there may be one thing that you do really well, and there might be a couple of things that you do really well, and there might be a couple of things that could use some work in your community. So as we kind of go through these, these are examples that I had in 2019, and so it was really interesting to see how much our synod has changed just in these 3 years, as I see friends that have gone on to other calls and other things. So forgive me for not refreshing some of these characteristics with more timely things, but I think they're good examples of things that we have done as a synod. So the first characteristic and vital sign is that communities embody God's presence. And remember, God creates in a myriad of ways, and that the diversity that God creates is embodied in our community. And so that's one of the strengths that I see in our synod, is that we do embody the depth and breadth of God's creation. And so this is a picture of Synod Council back in 2019, and I think it's a great example of how we invite all to serve in a myriad of ways. Vital communities invite and welcome all. And we see that work most acutely in how many of our congregations work to earn a designation called Reconciling in Christ. which is a LGBTQIA+ welcoming designation that is run by Reconciling Works. And so 2 examples of that was at the time Emmanuel in Norwood had just become our newest RIC congregation. And this picture is a picture of Good Shepherd and King of Prussia, who ordered these beautiful rainbow door banners that they hung on the outside of their church in a really busy intersection there in King of Prussia as a way to tell their community about God's radical welcome for all people. Vital communities of faith worship in spirit and truth. One of the beautiful things that I find about our synod, and one of the other hats that I wear is I occasionally serve on the worship planning team for Synod Assembly and have the honor to serve on the bishop's installation planning team. Worship is a beautiful and wide and diverse thing in our synod, from contemporary examples of praise band led worship to historically Black traditional worship, to intergenerational worship, to smells and bells and high liturgy, and everything in between is here in a Lutheran expression of worship. And I think that that is really beautiful. But one of the things about worshiping in spirit and truth is that people can tangibly experience the Spirit moving in the midst of community as an authentic version of worship. And so that takes a myriad of different expressions in our faith communities. Vital communities of faith share faith and tell stories. Being able to share your faith with others is, I think, of critical importance right now, and it's one thing that we don't do so well. Lutherans sometimes get that fearful look when you use the word evangelism, but being able to tell how God is active in your life with others is a really important part of congregational vitality. And so this is a picture of members of the Welcome Church who, through a Forward Together in Faith grant, got to go and spend time with their counterparts at the, I think was it Cathedral of the Night? Is that the community in Boston? Kayla, you're in the picture, so is that right, Cathedral? But it was a similar church without walls, and the community members were able to go and be with each other and learn from one another and create those relationships. So I think that's another vital piece of congregational vitality. Vital communities of faith promote healing, and whether that's our efforts on dismantling racism or whether it's providing space for recovery groups or specifically recovery-based worship experiences. These are all ways that we promote healing as a community. Show mercy and do justice by serving all. There are great community organizing groups here that are advocating for the needs of our neighbors, and some of that was here in some of the Power Metro demonstrations, where you can see our bishop on the front lines right there. But I don't know that you can see it on the slideshow, but the front lines right there over on the left of that power banner is the Bishop, Regina Goodrich, Carlton, and Lutherans were there on the front lines of that demonstration, which I think is really important. Practice radical generosity in all things. So in partnership with the generosity team, finding ways for congregations to practice that generosity is definitely a big indicator of vitality. And how do we help congregations think about ways that they might be generous of their time, their talent, and their treasures? So St. Paul's in Ardmore doubled the size of their community garden as a way to help live generously by giving to local food banks and giving more food away to those in need. Vital congregations grow and connect leaders. This is a Canoeing the Mountains event learning day that we did in partnership with the Presbytery of Philadelphia, which we will be doing again this year in February, as we connect leaders who think about what it's like to navigate these waters in this time. And so continuing to do that at a congregational level and a synodical level is an important part of the work of vitality. Are rooted in their community. So this is where I get to brag a little bit of stuff that St. Mark's does, but there are 2 points in our year where our community has really big events. One of them is the St. Patrick's Day parade here in Conshohocken that is almost its own holiday. But we are present there giving out just free water and free pretzels to folks all day long. And we do the same thing at the Conchi Beer Fest, although we haven't been doing it in the pandemic because it's been canceled. But hopefully we will see the light at the end of the tunnel and we'll see those resuming activities. But it's always fun to surprise people in a consumerist society that this is free. You don't have to pay for it. It's just for you. And it's always amazing to see how many people try and pay us for things. And it's like, no, it's just free. Vital communities of faith create change. Change is not a four-letter word. It is a big part of embracing ways in which we navigate the shifting landscape around us. And so this was the group of congregations that participated in Faithful Innovations. We had 8 SEPA congregations that began that 3-year journey as they have wrestled with what it means to be adaptive leaders and help the congregation kind of focus on the critical things that help make the systemic changes that are needed. So that is a big part of Vital Communities of Faith, is that we wrestle with what it means to do adaptive change and not technical change, and in moving ministry forward. I think this is, yeah. Finally, Vital Communities of Faith are grounded in hope. Hope's a big part of the work of Vitality. And we think that's clearly exemplified in ministries like Feast of Justice that vision a world where people in Philadelphia no longer hunger. And so how do we as the light for our community continue to hold out hope for others? So those are just some of the things that, as we started to research congregations that were thriving, the folks who had been researching this over the last 10 to 15 years, which was some from Texas and Linda Bobbitt from the Rocky Mountain Synod, they started to notice that these communities all shared these characteristics. And so what would it look like if we were to create communities that really intentionally focused on how these vital signs were present in your own community? And that can be as simple as just taking these characteristics to council and saying, hey, how do we do on all of these? Are there things that we feel we do exceptionally well? And how do we continue to work on the ones that maybe we need to work on a little bit? But these metrics are fundamentally different than the way the institutional church has measured itself over the last 50 years. And I like to say that these metrics are going to be more helpful for the missional church moving into the new landscape of ministry than counting butts and bucks. And traditionally, that's the way the church has always measured success, is that if you have a big budget and you have a big building and you have a lot of people in the pews, then you're successful and you're vital. And I don't know about that anymore. I think you can be critically vital for your community and worship 30 people. And I think you can be completely unvital and worship 1,500 people. The question is what is the strength of your relationship with God, each other, and your community? So for me, these are a different kind of metrics, and they can be really life-changing because we can begin to see that these are things we can work with. The truth is, and I think it was Megan McCracken pointed this out to me, the ELCA has been a dying institution ever since it was founded. We have been shrinking in number ever since we were founded. And that is just part of mainline denominations in America right now, that more people are not churched than churched. So the mission field is big. And the opportunity is out there. And I think if we intentionally focus on these metrics for how we create and sustain congregations, I think we might shift the focus on despair and see resurrection happening. Question, I'm going to pause there and I'm going to stop my screen and say, if anybody has any questions on those markers of vitality. You can also drop them in the chat too, if that's easier to to navigate.
Bryan, there is one in the chat.
Okay.
I don't know if you saw that. It said, Bryan, can you say more about adaptive change so that they may not be familiar with this term?
Yeah, well, and this is one thing that I have definitely recognized working with Vitality Team, and I'll talk about this in a little bit. We have done a lot of work with adaptive change for our leaders, so our pastors, our deacons, but we have not done a lot of that with our congregational leadership. So our council presidents, the executive team, and just congregational leaders in general, to bring the people of the whole community along with some of that. So adaptive change is, oh, and I didn't bring these books. Is it Alinsky? I always forget his name, but it's two guys from the Harvard Business School that when they looked at pushing corporations forward, they recognized that for many situations, the way we've always answered questions and problems isn't really working for us anymore. And again, this kind of goes back to the VUCA time that we're in, this volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous variables of, you know, a globalized world that's more interconnected now, but also feels completely alone. The complex and ambiguous place and space for doing things together has changed. And so more often than not, when we approach a problem, we solve it with technical change. So it's something that we can identify and implement and then evaluate. Well, that doesn't really get at the systemic problems that are affecting us right now. So if we want to address the problem that like institutional church is crumbling, that's an adaptive change problem. There's no amount of program or quick fix solution that you can insert in there to fix it. And so the adaptive change process helps us take the bigger balcony view and kind of take a step back and be reflective and look at ways in which we might be able to engage creatively that what's going on. And so adaptive change also creates this like culture of innovating and experimenting and evaluating over and over and over again. I remember when I went up to my cousin's graduation from Harvard, the keynote commencement speaker told all these Harvard graduates, fail fast, fail often, fail quickly, which seemed so counterintuitive to me at the time. That here you're telling all these bright Harvard graduates like fail, like that is not a language that they speak, right? And there's wisdom in that, though, is that, yes, if we're going to get it right, we're also going to get it wrong. And we can learn a lot in what didn't work so that we can craft the next experiment and next change thing that we do that it might work well. So that's a little bit about adaptive change. And I recognize that we have a long way to go to teach our congregation leaders about how to navigate and work with adaptive change. But it has been something that has been life-giving in my ministry and has really helped us tackle some of the more difficult things that we feel we're spinning our wheels with. So
I have one of the books here. It's
oh yeah,
Heifetz and Linsky. Leadership on the Line is like their basic books, but there are several others.
All right, cool. Well, hopefully there will be some other questions, but I'm going to keep going and I'm going to share my screen again. And this is the big question, like, okay, this sounds great. How are we going to do it all, right? So the Vitality team kind of has organized themselves around helping, again, the relationships form, which means that what we do as the Vitality team is help form those relationships in a congregation with God, each other, and their communities. So one of the ways, well, some of the ways that we partner with congregations, and this is just stuff that we've done here in the last couple of years as we kind of began this work. And I guess I should also talk a little bit about the history of the Vitality team. So I started in this work kind of sort of with the Forward Together in Faith campaign when we were consulting with congregations to either do a, they called it a MAP assessment, but a mission assessment profile with the Kairos Consulting Group, which was a process of helping congregations recognize their giftedness and the landscape that they were in for their community to do mission and ministry. And when that campaign kind of was coming to a close, I had conversations with our then director of evangelical mission, Pat Davenport, about how do we keep this work moving forward. And she said, well, funny you should ask, because the ELCA is starting to shift their focus towards vitality. And what would it look like if we had a whole vitality team to help continue this work as a synod? So she started that work, and then promptly 2 months later got elected bishop and left me to do all the work all by myself. So no, I'm just kidding. So she has a heart for this, and this is one of the initiatives that I think she helped germinate and continues to help us do. But it is a team of people working to kind of oversee some of this. And so when she set up the structure for it, she saw the vitality team helping our new mission starts, strategic ministries, and anchor churches. Those are three formalized ministry efforts of both the national church and our local synod. So for those new mission starts that we have in our synod, the Welcome Church, the Well, and Kairos communities, those are all fledgling ministry efforts that we help support as a synod and have for many years. So the Welcome Church is a church without walls with Pastor Violet Little, ministering largely to folks affected by homelessness in the city of Philadelphia. The Well is also a sheltering program that grew out of the Welcome Church and is also a collaboration with the Presbyterian. And Kairos is led by Bob, who is a community of, would you self-identify as a house church movement? I think.
Yes, yeah.
Of thinking of church outside the box. So we are certainly poised for a lot of new mission starts as I continue to look at different parts of the city and growing needs. There's a lot of opportunity and a lot of growth in our metro area. And I don't see a lot of churches being intentional about being in those spaces as they are formed and constructed. So I think there's a lot of potential for new mission starts in our area.
Bryan, would you explain an anchor church, please?
Yep, I'm getting to it. So can I go through strategic and then I'll wind an anchor?
Okay.
So strategic ministries is another effort of churchwide that seeks to create and support at-risk congregations who find themselves serving in pockets of poverty or among ethnic minority communities. So this is an initiative that is supported by the ELCA's directive to become younger and more diverse. And so this is a way that we can find communities that or congregations that are serving in areas that we want to make sure that we don't lose a Lutheran witness and are also supporting ethnic minority communities. So the old buzzword for this was redevelopment. We don't use that word anymore. And it is, how do we create strategic ministries in parts of our communities that help focus on those that are affected by poverty and or are serving ethnic specific communities. Anchor churches is yet another kind of newer, although it's not really new, it's been around for a long time. So this is ways for congregations to partner with one another where there might be a larger, stronger, more resource congregation that partners with another congregation to infuse it with energy and people power. And so for a period of time, two churches would align themselves in an anchor church arrangement so that it might help redevelop a congregation. Right now we have Temple in Havertown and Grace in, why am I drawing a blank on it? Grace?
Broomall.
Broomall, thank you. I was going to say Woodland, but that's a different congregation, sorry. Grace and Broomall just finished a year of this process and are getting ready to start year 2 of this process, where Temple and Grace are working together to help support Grace kind of redevelop and get stronger. So Kayla is there and doing that, and thankful she's with us today to kind of answer some of that. There are really 2 different models of anchor church. One I like and the other I don't. One of them is modeled in very corporate mentality of mergers and acquisitions. So it is a larger church taking over a smaller one. I don't necessarily like that arrangement. I mean, it is possible that is fruitful and can work, but it's not one that feels authentic to me. The one that we have been trying to model is one of accompaniment, where the congregation would come alongside the other congregation for a period, but then once that other congregation became more stable, they would kind of step away and maybe move on to accompanying another congregation, kind of do that. So those are kind of the three major ways that we create strategies and funding sources for developing congregations as kind of the backbone of our work as the Vitality team. So Pastor Brown, did that answer the question on, okay, on what that was? So in addition to working with those kind of formal arrangements, there's a whole bunch of stuff that we as the Vitality team do to help what I affectionately call equipping the saints for the work of ministry, and doing leadership empowerment, helping them understand adaptive change. And so there's a couple of different ways that we're doing that. Last year, we had the opportunity as a synod to write a grant to an organization called the Lilly Endowment. If you've done work in churches, you know that Lilly funds a whole lot of theological education and a lot of work in the church. They give billions of dollars away every year for congregations to be innovative. And they ask for grant perspectives for vibrant ministries. And it sounded an awful lot like congregational vitality. And so last year, during the spring, while everyone was busy trying to figure out what lockdown looked like, there was a team of us that was busy writing a grant for a 3-year process for $5 million. We made it into the final rounds of that. We didn't get selected though. And I don't know whether that was disappointing for me to know that we made it into the final rounds but didn't get selected, or just really kudos to us for writing our first major Lilly grant and getting that far. But what our team kind of dreamed about was, what would it look like if we had a process to help our congregation members affirm their baptismal promises while at the same time connected to God, each other, and their communities in more profound ways. So in the process of God closing that door on us, God lovingly opened a window and introduced us to the life of faith process, which is another process that helps people live into their baptismal promises by taking seriously their call to minister in their daily life. And so when I saw that, I said, I think this could be an opportunity for us to be part of this initiative as a pilot. So it is being run through the ELCA as a Holy Innovations project. They, as the Life of Faith initiative, have done this work in congregations one-on-one, but they've never done it as a synodical strategy. So they asked 9 synods to apply, of which they selected 2. We were one of them, along with Southwest Pennsylvania Synod, to start this process with 5 congregations in our synod. And it's a 3-year process that we'll be walking with congregations over this process as they take seriously their role as a community to help form the lives of faith in their congregation members so that they can live out their faith in every day, so that Sunday and Monday through Saturday are more connected for them. And we started this process here in September, and oh my gosh, it has been so life-giving already. So I am so excited to see where this goes. Another thing that we do is provide vitality consultations. There's a bunch of resources out there that can help you kind of assess and get those vital signs from congregations. And so if that's something that you feel might be helpful for your congregation and kind of framing a conversation around congregational vitality, we're happy to come and meet and talk about that. We also are a connection point for resources and grants. That if there are different initiatives that you need, I'm constantly getting questions of like, hey, where do I find money for this? So if we can be that library of resources and grants, we can help kind of align those things. Another thing that we often get rooked into is helping with buildings and facility consults, and thinking creatively about what do we do with our big empty buildings these days. We're here to kind of help with that. In a previous life, I worked in real estate, and particularly community development and commercial real estate. So that's one of the experiences that I bring to this team, and kind of helping us think through ways to find community partners in buildings. And then finally, we are death and resurrection people. And so as much as we're raising up new stuff, we also acknowledge that sometimes a process of holy closure is a reality for some of our congregations. This work was largely overseen by Pastor Bill Vanderslice, who recently died. And the bishop and I are currently in a process to kind of figure out where that work will land. But for right now, it kind of resides in the Vitality team, in partnership with what Bill was doing. But the good news is we don't have a congregation who's actively in holy closure at this point. We have a bunch of buildings that we're managing, and I have often said the Synod wants to be in the ministry business and not in a landlord business. But that kind of gets wrapped into our work as well. I'm going to pause there and go back into the chat to see the Serena Anchor Church. Okay, I think I got that. And I saw John's direct. Yep. For that. So questions on that kind of stuff?
I know that a lot of our congregations have recovery ministries that use their building, or recovery programs that use their building. Is there a way that you know of to invite those groups to use your space?
You mean to get additional groups, or?
Yeah, so I know that there are members of this congregation who are in recovery from substance uses, but we do not have a AA or NA group meeting at our congregation. We certainly have the space. We would love to welcome them, but how do we go about welcoming them in?
Yeah, I'm going to speak specifically for your context because you're in Montgomery County. There is the AANA website that you could probably reach out to and just say, hey, we're looking to host a group, and see if there's anybody willing in the program to start up a group there. I know they're always looking for groups, and here's what happened in the pandemic is a lot of our churches shut them out. So St. Mark's picked up like 5 in the pandemic. And for good or for ill, thanks be to God, I haven't heard of any cases where it led to virus spreading. But I looked at it and said, recovery is a vital ministry. Like that is an essential service for people who are working the process of recovery. They need a place. And yes, we encourage most of our groups to try and meet on Zoom as much as they can. In fact, that's what they use our Zoom room capabilities upstairs. But for those who need it, you might not just need to get to a meeting, and providing space for that was a critical thing for us, because a lot of churches shut them down and said, we're not doing anything in person. So I know there are groups looking to reform as we kind of emerge back to more in-person stuff. So I'll pose a question. See, this is what I do with adult learners who get real quiet. Talk to me a little bit about the characteristics of vitality that you see present in your ministry context.
I'm going to jump in. It's what I do. The congregation that I am in, I think the pandemic has created an openness to adaptive leadership that wasn't there previously. And we have decided as a congregation to take the balcony view by taking the 3 main verbs in our mission statement and spending a year on each one. So this is the year of welcome. And that's what we're talking about in all kinds of different ways. Every team is addressing how can we address welcome and what we do, including the cemetery team. You know, every team is embracing that question. We're addressing it very frequently in newsletters and sermons, and even in our liturgy. We have a welcome song that we're singing every week to try to keep that focus and have, in this completely changing all of the time life that we're living, having one thing that we're consistently focused on. Next year it'll be worship. The following year it'll be witness. So that's one way that we're trying to do some adaptive change in our congregation.
Great. Yeah, that clarity of vision is really important. So how about others?
I know here at Grace Brumal, we have had a small holy closure of our nursery school, and we are completely repurposing our space for establishing a wellness center, which grew out of the number of recovery groups that already meet. We have five nights of the week. There's a 12-step group that meets here. And just thinking about that and the weary world, Pastor Tim Johansson and myself kind of cooked up a crazy idea and thought about a wellness center, because in a past life I was and am a music therapist, and just having those connections. And we have been able to scrape together some funds through grants and our own elbow grease, have renovated some spaces, and now we are able to offer counseling rooms and classrooms to a community nonprofit that teaches kids cooking, culture, and nutrition, as well as does after-school tutoring. So just starting to understand that we don't have to sell our church, but we have to tell people about our faith, right? I think, and I'm one of those people who could get tempted into thinking I need to sell my church. I need to make it look relevant and have like the right media kit or the right tchotchkes to give away. But it's really about telling, or more so showing people about what our faith is. Even if it means taking our ministry in a completely different direction.
Have these things been challenging to focus on because of pandemic realities?
Yes.
I feel like footnote, everything this year has been due to COVID.
I think a huge thing that we're seeing, and I know that we're not alone, is just kind of a withdrawal and cocooning by people. You know, it's the great resignation is not just paid work, it's also volunteering and participation in lots of things, including church things.
Well, and those are the kinds of things that you have to sit and wrestle with, right? That's the challenge of adaptive leadership, says that the great resignation happened, and the tendency will be for us to just fix it with technical change. Well, I'll just get more volunteers. But why did they resign in the first place? Those are the bigger questions. I think oftentimes it's better to have questions than it is to have answers. And to know that nobody has the manual. Like, this has been the weird thing, is I find myself in this role as the chair of the Vitality, and I'm like, well, I don't have the magic fix. Don't come looking at me like I've got answers, but like I'm willing to wrestle with you and discern with you and figure out like what is going to resonate for your community. Because the reality is all of these key relationships are highly contextual. So what works for Serena at Christ may not work for Nancy and Grace Hatfield, even though they're like not that far away from each other. And what we do, you know, at Trinity Lansdale is not going to work at Trinity South Philly, right? I mean, so some of that is going to be contextual, which is always the challenge of our synod because we are so diverse. Our blessings are sometimes our curses too, is that we have to think across the spectrum of like all of the things for all of the people. But
I think too, though, that there's some encouragement in the realization that that this isn't just something that's happening in our congregation. It's something that's happening in the whole country, in every industry. It's everywhere. So not only are technical changes not going to be effective, the way that we recruit volunteers isn't going to. But there are bigger forces at play than whether or not we thanked our volunteers enough. There is something else happening, and having that bigger context is really helpful because it gives us patience and as you said, courage to fail fast and often, to know that there really isn't a technical answer, that we haven't done anything wrong, that this is just what's happening.
I think it would also be really helpful to have some space where people who are working on holy innovations of various kinds can just chat with each other and, support each other. It can feel really lonely working on things by yourself.
Well, and that's one of the things. Oh, sorry, go Sue.
I'm sorry, Brian. I was just going to say, I wrote you after the Upper Bucks gathering that you and Erica facilitated, because that was very helpful for the people who attended in person from Christ Trumbarrsville to see that there were others in the same boat. And so, like, piggybacking on what Bob is saying, I think it's helpful to bring people together so they can say, oh, it's not just us.
Well, and that's what here over the summer is Bob, I think, started doing this just as a hey, we're all wrestling with what to do with technology. And it's kind of shifted here this summer and fall into other topics as well. Would it be helpful for the Vitality team to host a monthly conversation, like a learning and then conversation to say, how's it going? Like, how are we doing in this area? We've kicked around the idea of being able to do that as well, to create that forum of hey, what are people experimenting with? How can we help you process what you're seeing?
And help them rethink how they're struggling.
Yes.
To reframe it.
Yeah, so here's the life of faith stuff that I'm learning. The institutional church, and I don't know that I necessarily like the imagery here because I think it gets a tinge ableist. But Dwight Du Bois, who wrote the book The Scattering, which is one of our key findings here, he talks about the institutional church's autoimmune response. We get a creative idea and we immediately attack it because that's not the way we've done it, right? That's not the way we've done it. It's the autoimmune response from the institutional church trying to hold on. And so all during this life of faith process, as we've been trying to think about ways that this might become real for us as we help people focus on their daily discipleship, I've been mindful of that, of how much we've been conditioned to function institutionally. And the missional church doesn't have any need of institutional church. Jesus didn't say, go and build buildings. Jesus said, go make disciples and baptize them. Well, last time I checked, and at least it's true for the Ethiopian eunuch and Philip, we didn't need much. In fact, ditch water worked just fine. So the institution needs all these things, like buildings and programs and calendars and resources, but the mission of Christ doesn't. It needs your willingness to tell others about faith. All right, then I will bring that to the Vitality team and we'll see about getting that scheduled. Help me while I have a cross section of people. I honestly think a Saturday would be better for that, or a weekend time. I have sensed that in my role with the Vitality team, working with congregational leaders to be kind of a niche for the Vitality team to do. And so our meetings at least are usually evenings and weekends. So to look at carving out space for that. We also got to at least do one in 2019 was the Vitality Learning Day. And then the pandemic hit. So we were hopeful that in the fall, we would all have a synod-wide learning day. So I think once things become more embodied in person, we're going to try and make a go of the Generosity learning event in January. but the Vitality team here this summer was like, I just can't see us gathering yet in person in the fall. So we did not end up planning anything for that, but that could potentially be another learning opportunity for us as we do this.
That's been the challenge with this whole time of figuring out when can we make the change. Since there's a bunch of silence, I just thought, if I don't want to put you on the spot, Kayla, but if you could tell us a little bit about how that Anchor Church relationship is working.
I'll let you know when I have a firm answer. I don't mean to be coy, but it's really a relationship embodied and embarked upon in faith. It's a lot of building the plane as we're flying it, as Pastor Bryan likes to say, and I've really come to love that expression because there is no manual, there is no how-to, there's how we embody and how we faithfully act. So for us, the whole, everything was initiated in 2019, the conversations. And so goes to show what happens to the best laid plans. So it's been a lot of feeling our way through the dark and living into that mystery and discovery. So that's kind of like waxing theological about it, but the concrete, it's looked like sharing worship when we can, when it's been safe. It has looked like sharing resources. Temple in Havertown has applied for grants on our behalf. They have their congregation trends younger than ours, so when it came time to paint rooms and lay flooring, we had our folks who could show up certainly do that, and it was a blessing to have someone who is experienced in laying flooring and used to do it for a living come, and who also runs 9 miles a day do it, because some days we were doing it when it was 95 degrees. So it was really a blessing this summer to be able to truly share human power in renovating these rooms, or having someone from Temple who loves thrifting and yard sales go around and pick up items that she thought would make the rooms look lived in, right? They've supported us as we celebrated our holy closure of the nursery school. We combined for a blessing of the animals, and even the pets all got along. So it's been a lot about, now that we are able to be a bit more embodied, it is about really forging faithful relationships and not just sharing stuff and resources, although that has been a gift. And just constantly recognizing that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. We can do more together with just about anything than we can do separately.
I'm going to also drop it. I forgot to put this in the PowerPoint slide in the chat box. Dwight Zeichel, who's up at Luther Seminary, is a voice that I find very helpful, and find that he's pretty spot on with most things. So part of understanding the landscape for ministry right now is understanding this paradigm shift from the church of the 1950s to where we are right now. And he uses the language of the age of authenticity, from the age of association. So if you think about it, 1950, you put a sign out front that said Lutheran, and all the Lutherans by association filed into that building. Well, now, like, you can put whatever sign you want, because every time I talk to somebody, they've got this mix of moral therapeutic deism, and it's like, well, all gods are the same, right? It doesn't really matter where I go, in their head, and they don't really care what's on your sign. What they care about is the authenticity of the lived faithful community. And so you've got a bunch of people who are really looking for that authentic community. We live in a world of virtual. We are incredible detectors of when it's fake and when it's BS. And so we know when it's authentic and real, and to have people that acknowledge that we don't have all the answers, but we're willing to wrestle with you. And so when I read this, I was finally like, this is eye-opening for me to be like, they keep looking at me like I have all the answers. And I'm like, no, I just know how to show up and be with you. And that I think is honestly gold right now. And if you're serving in a leadership capacity, you don't have to have all the answers. You just have to show up and be present with your people. And that's huge. So I'm also going to throw up here some other books and things. Let me get back to that point. I am also going to, and thank you to those who have already volunteered privately in the chat. I won't call you out, but we're looking for more folks to serve on the Vitality team. So if this is something that sounds exciting or interesting or something you want to learn more about, we are looking for Vitality team folks. So I will put my email in the PowerPoint that we'll send out. Right now, given the current makeup of the team, we've been meeting every other month on the second Monday at 6:30 p.m. via Zoom. If we get new members and that availability changes, we're willing to amend that to try and figure out other times that we can meet, but that is one of the times that we do that. For that, and we usually meet till like, I don't know, 8:30. I try and be done by 8:30, so keeping to that. Here are some other resources that in my work have been really foundational for me. I probably should have opened this up to the other members of the Vitality team, but Neighborhood Church and Everywhere You Look were ones that I read here this summer. I just listened to the interview with Priscilla Pope Levinson yesterday. She did an interview on Lewis Center for Church Leadership with Doug Powell. Is a great resource if you don't know that already. But she wrote this book, Models of Evangelism. She's been teaching it for like many years. And the thing that I liked about her approach is she took the depth and breadth of it. So it's not like what I affectionately call, from spending time in North Carolina, was street corner preaching approaches to evangelism, but even grounded one of them in liturgical evangelism and thinking about ways that our liturgical services are welcoming and telling the story of our faith. So that was a good one that I find there. If you do find yourselves more liturgical, and part of reclaiming the catechumenate has been this book that's been helpful for me, to Go Make Disciples, is a really great book that if you're more formed in those liturgical circles, that's a really great approach to that. The bishop sent me this book and I devoured it in like a weekend, but Kingdom Come is another great book about activating faith. The 5 Principles of Fruitful Congregations was also really good in kind of building up those characteristics. It's written that it could be used as like a devotional for church councils or leadership teams. That's really good, but it helps. It's talking about radical hospitality, passionate worship, intentional faith development, risk-taking, mission and service, and extravagant generosity. But again, built on that work of what did we find was working in congregations. And then the big granddaddy textbook that I often go back to is The Missional Church, edited by Daryl Guter. A lot of us in Vitality go back to this. I read this in seminary. It's got a lot of research in it, and it's an academic textbook, but it is a really great groundwork for what we see as the sending of the church in North America, and how we reclaim that missional energy so that we're not just continuing to do the institutional church over and over and over again. Well, hopefully this was helpful in thinking through ways that we structure our ministry together. Of course, if there are other ways that you need help or resources, as our bishop says, I don't know unless you let me know. And when we know, we do better. So please use us as a resource out there, that if there are things that we can do to help partner with you in your mission and ministry, we're willing to do that. So.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you for making the time to be here.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation.